Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Candid Conversations with the One America Movement. My name is Andrew Hanauer. I am the president and CEO of the One America Movement. I'm coming to you this morning from the choir room of a local church that has allowed me to find a place to do Zoom calls where I won't be interrupted by my children, which is probably the best thing that's happened in 2020 at this point for me. We are so grateful to have you with us at this time. We know this is an extremely difficult time in our country. A lot of folks are frustrated. They're feeling hopeless. They're looking at social media and seeing the worst of what all sorts of folks in our country have to offer. And at the same time, they are looking for something better. They're looking for something more hopeful, something that brings us together, something that calls us up. Something that builds a future together for all of us as Americans. And that's what we're trying to do here at the One America Movement. And that's what our guest today is doing amazing work around as well. If you want to get involved, if you want to be part of that movement, you can join us, oneamericamovement.org, and you can get involved in our Corona Rebuild initiative, which is bringing Americans together to address the impacts of the coronavirus epidemic in their communities at coronarebuild.org. But our guest today is an incredible leader at a time when we really need moral leadership in this country. At a time when we look to our leaders and often get the worst things that we're seeing in our country right now instead of hope and vision. Our guest today is someone who is trying to call us towards a higher place and a better place. We are honored today to have Justin Giboney with us. Justin is the founder of the AND campaign. He is the author of a book that has just come out with his co-author Michael Ware and Chris Butler, entitled Compassion and Conviction, which we'll talk about today as well. Justin, thanks so much for coming on with us.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Glad to be here.
Yeah, appreciate it. So, at One America, we bring people together and we talk a lot about how important it is to address the hard stuff, to do work together in our communities. But we also know that a lot of that can only move forward when we have a relationship, when we have trust. And so we spend a lot of time building those relationships. And so when we bring guests on here, before we get into everything from Louisville to the White House, why don't we just take a step back and let people get to know you a little bit? You live in Atlanta, Georgia, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. Been here for about a decade and a half.
Very cool. And do you have kids doing e-learning right now?
I do. They're actually in the room with me, but they are being quiet so far. So I have 3 sons. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. And would you say that I think e-learning isn't the worst thing that's happened in 2020? That would be a pretty egregious statement, but I think it's in the top 100. How's that going so far? Is it?
It's going. It's not always painless, but we're getting through it.
Good. That's good. Yeah. No, it's tough for me to sit on Zoom for 8 hours, and my 7-year-old son has more energy than I do. So yeah, if you got 3 of them, good luck. I hope that's going okay. Well, welcome to Candid Conversations. Really appreciate having you on. I think part of what we're seeing in our country right now around the polarization, team sports identity, and I've seen you talk about this on Twitter, is this kind of this knee-jerk acceptance of everything my side says, knee-jerk rejection of everything that another side says, which I think is really harmful and toxic. You founded something called the AND campaign, which I think in many ways is sitting in an interesting place to try and address that problem. Can you talk a little bit about the AND campaign, what you guys are doing?
Sure. The AND campaign is a Christian civic organization that is trying to really bring what we call the compassion and conviction of the gospel into the public square. So we want to talk about not just justice, but we want to talk about moral order. We want to make sure that those things are talked about together. And we're really trying to raise civic literacy among Christians to help them apply their values to the issues of the day. But part of applying your values to the issues of the day is reframing the issues sometimes. Unfortunately, I think in our political landscape, we have a lot of false dichotomies. It's hard for people to see sometimes how justice and moral order go together. But the AND campaign, that's literally what the AND campaign means: compassion and conviction, justice and moral order, love and truth. We think that you have to combine those things, and that each side, whether you're talking about progressives or conservatives, are missing something. And unless people are kind of brave enough to pierce through some of these narratives, then it's going to be hard for us to rebound from some of the stuff that's going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I'd love to get your thoughts on an aspect of that, which is the two-party system right now. The implication is whatever your position is on abortion, somehow you have also a position on tax policy that is somehow in line with that, right? I mean, if you're a Republican, then therefore you are bum 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 bum, and it leaves no room for people who have views that align sometimes with this party, sometimes with that party. And it sounds like that's partly what you're talking about. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think they try to squeeze people into these boxes, right? If you're a Democrat, you believe this, and this, and you got to take it or leave it, right? To question anything within that agenda is to be unfaithful, right, or unloyal to the party, and that's just not true. People have beliefs that differ. There's nuance in a lot of these issues, and we have to be willing to address that and to say, hey, I may agree with the Democrats when it comes to poverty, voter rights, but then I may disagree with them when it comes to the sanctity of life, when it comes to religious freedom. That's fine. That's a lot of Americans stand there, but they don't have a voice because once people get into the civic arena, you see them kind of being squished into one of these two boxes. And we're just trying to break out of that and say, yeah, if you want to be a Democrat, be a Democrat. If you want to be a Republican, be a Republican, but don't be a generic Democrat or a generic Republican. Understand that you can have your own voice and that you need to challenge your side. I mean, that's one of the things we talk about more than anything is challenging your side to do what's right.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've talked about that at One America. The concept of an in-group moderate, right? Someone who, it's not that they're moderate politically, but they're willing to speak out against the worst impulses of their own group. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's an important conversation. You hear a lot of, moderates and centrists take a lot of shots because it seems like it's someone who's just trying to find the squishy middle. But I would disagree. I think moderate is more like a disposition. And there was a book I was reading that was saying, it's not to say on every issue I'm in the middle, right? That would be disingenuous. It's to say, to walk into a conversation with humility and not assume that one side is right or wrong. So there's a lot of issues when I'm talking about voter rights, I'm not in the middle. When I'm talking about sanctity of life, I'm not in the middle, but I'm a centrist because I don't automatically go to one side or the other.
Right. And I think, when you talk about speaking out to your own side, one of the things that, we know that comes up against is kind of the way that we're wired to be part of a group, right? It's really, really powerful to feel the sense that I fit in, that I belong, that I'm accepted. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is to just go along with your side, right?
Right.
So can you talk about either in your own life or in the work that you do, the kind of experiences that you've had in terms of being going against your own side and what kind of sort of pushback you've gotten or response?
Yeah, well, being a Democrat and being someone who's more culturally conservative, just like a lot of African-American Christians are, there's bound to be some conflict if you're really going to stand by your beliefs. And so, one instance of that was in 2016 when I was running to be a delegate for the Democratic National Convention for the second time. I had also done it in 2012. I was kind of a protest delegate. And so I was running in John Lewis's district, the 5th congressional district in Georgia. And I ran really on a almost like a populist economic platform, but more of a cultural conservative platform too. I kind of combined those two things. So I talked about the sanctity of life. I talked about religious freedom. I talked about still allowing folks to come to the table who may disagree on sexual ethics. And that wasn't welcomed by everybody. I did end up winning. My group, the team that I was running with, we won more votes than almost anyone, maybe almost 2 times more than some of the other folks. And but there were groups that tried to get me kicked off the delegation to say that, I shouldn't have spoke on those things. It wasn't how Democrats speak. But the truth is there's a lot of Democrats who think that way and just don't have a voice. And so I think it's a matter of being able to step up and say the consequences will be what they are, but I have to say something because it's the right thing to do.
Got it. And so now the AND campaign, you guys have released a statement of some kind, right, around the 2020 campaign and election. Um, Talk about that statement if you don't mind, but also just how you're viewing the moment we're in terms of the election coming up.
Yeah, so we wrote a 2020 presidential election statement during the Democratic primary. And this was really just us taking our framework. So what we try to do is provide Christians with a framework for engaging politics. We took that framework, which is the compassion and conviction I talked to you about, and we just applied it to what was going on today. And so we talked about a variety of issues in ways that you would never see in any of the partisan platforms. We talked about the importance of helping the poor, making sure that the poor aren't, when we talk about economics, they're not the last thing that we're talking about where they just get the scraps, but there's something that we talk about first. We talk about religious freedom. We talked about how religious freedom and LGBTQ rights are not necessarily in conflict, and that there are ways that we can work and live together and make sure that everybody has basic civil rights. And that's something that the AND campaign supports for everybody, whether we agree with the LGBTQ perspective or not. We do not think people should be fired from their jobs or should be unable to get housing because of things of that nature.
Got it. Thank you. What when you think about the sort of situation that we're in right now, we in 2016 we had an election where I think a significant number of Americans voted against the other candidate, right? And it was toxic, and yet as unpopular as the main candidates were, there was very little, very few Americans voted for anyone else, right? When you think about how this system doesn't really work for a lot of people, how a lot of people don't fit into it, a lot of people are frustrated. A lot of Christians feel like they don't belong in either party. What's the path forward? I mean, how do we change this?
Yeah, I think what people have to do first, they have to be willing to number one, separate themselves as far as their identity from their political party. It is fine to be in a political party. I think there's a practical benefit to that, but that does not mean that you just accept whatever's given to you. And even the exhausted middle, right? Even those folks in the middle, the exhausted majority, I think they call them. They too often just go along with the party too. They too often don't speak up to say something. So I don't treat the exhausted middle as some folks who are just victims. We have an opportunity to step up, and we need to say something, but we need to separate ourselves, because I think what happens is, as you said, it's not that we love our side of the aisle, it's that we fear the other side so much. And we have to engage in those conversations and not operate from a position of fear, because one of the things that fear does is it will prevent us from challenging our side, because we feel like anything we say to challenge our side empowers the other side. And that's just not true. When we challenge our side, when we take our side to task necessarily, what it does is it gives us credibility. It gives us the credibility to address things that could be tougher.
Absolutely. And when you think about these issues as a Christian, how does your faith impact how you view this? I know I've heard you speak before, and I've said similar things as well about how part of what's happening in our country is that people are treating their politics like their religion, right? Their identity is wrapped up in their political team in a really unhealthy way, because as a Christian, we're believing in a God who we believe is perfect, and we've yet to see a political party that is perfect. So, how do you view this in terms of your faith?
Yeah, the first thing that my faith does within this conversation is it tells me that although politics give me a robust opportunity to love my neighbor, and so politics are important, that politics aren't an ultimate thing. And so there's something that's even more important than policy and all that. And I take those things very seriously. Look, I'm a political strategist. I never strategize to win, but my public witness, what I'm, the messaging and what my actions are saying to the world is actually more important than actually winning a political battle. And that's really, in this moment, what's necessary to change things. Is not people, we've got to be able to see past this election. When we're unable to see past this election, it makes it seem like a lot of the things we do are justified when they're really not. And so I think faith forces you to say, even if I lose on this particular matter, there's something bigger out there, and I have a responsibility to do better, to make sure that my witness is more important than winning.
Absolutely. And when the ends justify the means, other people's views of Christianity become, I think, understandably less impressed. When you talk about the work that you guys do, we've talked a little bit about speaking out to the left about your beliefs around, as you put it, moral order. In terms of the other side of that, you work with, at the AND campaign, you work with Christians who are more conservative, in communities that are whiter. Are you talking to those folks about racial justice issues, and how does that go, and what have you found in that work?
Yeah, so with the AND campaign, we work with biblical, Orthodox Christians in general, kind of starting with my tradition, which is the traditional Black church, but also having conversations with white evangelicals, Hispanic evangelicals, Asian folks who are in the church and who have a high view of Scripture. And so, absolutely, when we go into those white evangelical spaces, we talk about justice, and we talk about the Bible and what the prophets had to say about justice, what Jesus had to say about justice, and that the fact is justice in the Bible does have a social and racial application, and that we have to do more to apply it. One of the things that I really want to impress upon a lot of evangelicals is that, yes, there are some distorted versions of justice in the public square right now. I readily admit that. There are some things that are called social justice that really have nothing to do with justice per se, that are really more about individual expression. But the conclusion that we should draw from that is not that we should run away from the justice conversation. The conclusion we should draw from that is that we should engage it and give people an example of what true justice looks like. And I think too often, more conservative, ideologically conservative Christians will run away from the justice conversation rather than embracing it and showing people how to do it right. And then again, we also have to realize that ideological conservatism and theological conservatism are not always the same thing. And so I think sometimes we conflate the two. And so we're doing what's ideologically conservative and thinking that it's theologically conservative. But I would say that justice and applying justice to social issues is ideologically conservative because it's following the Bible closely and doing what is theologically conservative because it's doing what the Bible tells you to do and trusting when the word says that God values justice.
Yeah, thank you. So you wrote a book, which for those of you out there, a book is a thing with like paper. It's not on a screen. I guess you can get it on a screen now, but man, we need to get back to reading books. I've been trying to read books instead of looking at my phone, and I feel better after I read books. So go out and buy Justin's book, people, for your own good. Tell us about it. Compassion and Conviction.
Yeah, so me, Michael Ware, and Chris Butler wrote a book called Compassion and Conviction, which is the AND campaign's guide to faithful civic engagement. And really what we were trying to do is give Christians a really clear framework for engaging politics. We start with the question, should Christians engage? And we really go through the Bible and how the Bible talks about engaging society and why we have government. I mean, so we start there. And so I think this is a great book for people who are just trying to understand politics from a faith lens, but also people who have been in politics for a while and understand that we have to do it better. And so we really get into our framework of what it looks like to represent justice and moral order, to understand that those two things aren't in conflict, but are actually interdependent. One of the points that we make in the book, and this is important for progressives, is that, even with postmodernism, I think progressives have to realize that you can't have justice without absolute truth. Because if you don't have absolute truth, then you don't have an absolute standard. You don't have an unconditional standard that applies to everyone. And so if you want that standard to apply to everyone, if you want to be able to tell the white supremacists that they have to do justice, well, then there has to be absolute truth. And so that's something I think the left misses that helps with the book. But we also say, you can't have moral order without justice. A society that has law and order but no justice is not really an ordered society. That is disorder by definition.
I love that. I feel like I'm back in college in the hallway talking about postmodernism and absolute truth and all that. Only now there's children doing e-learning in the background, which is totally fine, by the way. So that's awesome. What one thing I've heard you talk about in the past, we talk about speaking out to our own side, and that can be kind of hypothetical, right? So you go on Facebook, you see your friend post something, you disagree. It's someone who you agree with politically in general, but they're saying something that's gone too far.
Mhm.
too negative or too hateful. And you know that if you type in a comment and say, I don't agree with that, you're going to get a lot of hate. And sometimes people have to weigh the cost and the reward, right? Again, the cost of going against your group can be high because if you get kicked out of your group, where do you go, right? Um, the reward has to be high too. And I think one thing that I've heard you do before on a call that I saw you speak at was give an example that from history of someone who spoke out sort of against their own side. Um, and I think sometimes people need to hear stories like that so they can see that when they do it, they're also in line with the traditions of people who have done this in the past. So you talked about Frederick Douglass speaking out against his own side in a sense. Could you tell that story?
Yeah, sure. So Frederick Douglass was giving a speech to a group of abolitionists. I think he was somewhere, maybe Rock, New York, somewhere in New York. And he has a quote, and some people have heard the quote. He said, I will work with anybody to do good and nobody to do wrong. But people don't know what he was really saying. He was really telling the abolitionists that he would work with them to abolish slavery, but he would not work with them to destroy the Union. And this is such a profound statement because this was in the middle when slavery was still going on, right? When slavery's still going on, he looks at the people who are his allies and he says, I will be with you on one thing. I will not be with you on another. And that is just an extraordinarily principled stance, especially for us today when to say something against your tribe, so to speak, is heresy. Right, to say that you guys could possibly be wrong or one of your conclusions could actually be destructive is almost unthinkable right now, right? They would literally try to kick you out. But he understood that to get to the place that he was trying to go, he had to challenge his side as well, that he had to be very clear on what was going to cause them to move forward and what would actually push them backwards. So he told the abolitionists, look, destroying the Union actually takes away the mechanism that we have to get rid of slavery. That doesn't make sense. I'm not going to go along with that. And I think if someone in Frederick, a former slave who had family members that were still in slavery, I think for someone like that to be able to question his side at that moment tells us that we can certainly do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's make this real for folks. So if you're out there listening, you're a white evangelical Christian who's hearing things on your Facebook feed that you know are not right, targeting people of color or progressives or whatever. You're a progressive and you're hearing that anything is justified in defense of principles that are understandably people standing up against what has been 400 years of oppression, and you feel like this isn't the right course. What do you say to those folks? What do you want? What would you like to see them do in the next couple months?
Well, let me first say that social media is not always the best place to have those conversations, right? So sometimes it needs to be more of a face-to-face side conversation. But usually what I try to do is I try to affirm what the person is saying that's right? Like, here's where you get it. We don't have to be quiet. We shouldn't be quiet. We should protest. We should make sure that we are being loud and people understand this is not acceptable. And that does not mean that you have to do it in a way where you're kind of being just, kind of afraid and you're not really getting loud. No, you can be civil and you can be loud and you can make sure that and you can be disruptive, right, in certain contexts. So I would affirm that. But then I would also say, especially for, Christians who are in that conversation, that there is a certain standard by which we must, that we must pay attention to. There is a standard that says there's a wrong way to go about things sometimes. I often tell people that the cause that you're fighting for is very important, but so is the spirit of the movement. So are the methods and tactics that you're willing to use. Those things are just as important as the cause. Because if you look throughout history, a lot of tyrants, a lot of people who did bad things didn't start off with a bad cause. They just let a bad spirit and bad tactics get into what they were doing, and they accepted that as necessary for the moment. And some things are never necessary for the moment, and we have to kind of have the moral imagination to see that.
Thanks. It's been a hard year, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, it's just been a hard year. What's giving you hope right now? What are you excited about? What are you feeling good about?
I'm feeling good about just, the people who I talk to who are kind of changing the way that they view justice, the way that they view social justice and the importance of it because what has happened during this crisis, right? You know, when COVID struck, then we started seeing all these instances of racialized violence, and we couldn't look away, right? There was nothing else to look at because everything had been shut down. And I think there has been a lot of people who have questioned how they looked at those things before. So that gives me encouragement. But also some of the voices that I see, the upcoming leaders that I see talking about these issues and how they talk about these issues. There are a lot of very articulate, very passionate voices that are kind of rising up in the midst of this. I mean, you have people like Dr. Charlie Dates, Esau McCauley, Lisa Fields. I mean, there are a lot of people who are speaking, Alan Noble, who are speaking to these issues in a way that speaks to both sides, that's charitable, but also very determined. And I think it's gonna and courageous. And I think it's gonna have a big impact.
That's great. As we get to the end of this year, we got folks concerned about the outcome of the election, but also the sort of process of the right. Like, are the results going to be accepted? Is there going to be violence? What's going to happen next? And I think at the same time, also, we know that the vast majority of Americans want democracy to be upheld. They want peaceful, disagreement rather than shooting each other in the streets. And it's hard to see that sometimes because, as you said, social media it's not real life. We're seeing the most extreme things over and over again, sort of pummeling us. What are your thoughts on the next 2 months specifically in terms of where you see the country going, and then what's going to come after that?
Yeah, I would just ask. I mean, this is a moment where we have to have responsible leadership. And that's civic leadership, that's leadership within our institutions or whatever. So I would just call leaders and just everyday people to be responsible when you talk about some of this stuff. It's going to be incredibly important that we have people who are willing to communicate with intellectual honesty. And sometimes that means, and I wrote an article about this in The Hill a few weeks ago, sometimes that means making an argument against your immediate self-interest or what seems to be your immediate self-interest, because you have to tell the truth. And sometimes the truth does not go along with the narrative that your tribe wants to put out there. But until we have people who are bold enough to say, you know what, this doesn't help our narrative, but it's the truth, and this is what's necessary to heal this nation. Until we have people willing to do that, it's going to be very tough. One thing I think you'll find, though, when you're willing to do that, it gives you credibility with the other side and makes the other side more willing to do that. And that's the hope we have to have, to say, yes, this may look like it hurts me in the short term, but it's the right thing to do, and it can really heal the public discourse.
Yeah, absolutely. And 50 years from now or whatever, we're not going to look back and say, oh, thank God we did that immoral thing that got us a little bit of political advantage, right? We're going to think back and say, thank God that we did the right thing.
That's right.
Justin Giboney, thanks so much for your time. The book is called Compassion and Conviction, and you can get it where?
You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at InterVarsity Press, which is the publisher. There are some small Christian bookstores that you can go to as well. And so it's all over. You can Google it and find it. But I think those who are trying to do politics more faithfully will really benefit from the framework that we provide, which is a framework that says Christians can disagree, but there are some basic things that we should agree on.
Absolutely. Justin, thanks so much for your time. Go buy the book, folks. Go read a book just in general, and good luck with e-learning.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being there.
All right.